Hi, you're watching Connect the World. I'm Lynda Kinkade. Welcome back. Well, it could be a recipe for disaster. A beleaguered US Secretary of State who has some weighty international issues on his plate. His boss, President Trump, who is clearly annoyed by media reports that Rex Tillerson called him a moron. And Defense Secretary Jay Mattis, all attending a closed-door White House lunch in around 30 minutes' time. So just what will be on the menu? CNN military and diplomatic analyst John Kirby joins me from Washington. Always good to have you with us, John.
Thanks, Lynda. Good to be with you.
So we've got the Secretary of State, the Defense Minister, the President, certainly a lot of ground to cover, but all overshadowed by this public spat we've seen between Rex Tillerson and Donald Trump. Rex Tillerson, of course, calling him a moron, and Donald Trump questioning his Secretary of State's IQ. Is this going to be an awkward lunch?
Well, I guess it could be, but I rather suspect, Lynda, that it won't be. This is a routine lunch meeting that the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense have with the President every couple of weeks or so. I remember under the last administration, my two bosses, both Secretary Hagel and Secretary Kerry, used to do the same thing. So I think it'll be fairly pro forma in that regard. There are certainly a lot of significant policy things for them to discuss, whether it's Iran and the future of the Iran deal, whether it's North Korea, whether it's the fight against ISIS, and so on. So I think they're going to have a full agenda as it is, and I would be very surprised if any of this Twitter drama that's out there is really going to seep into the conversation much.
And just speaking of North Korea, when the Secretary of State recently toured the region, President Trump said, "Stop wasting your time. There's only one thing that's going to solve this."
Right.
And when Trump was asked about whether he's undermining his Secretary of State, he said no.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, so I've talked to some folks at the State Department about this, and they really believe that they really believe, and the President really believes that he is in fact trying to help Secretary Tillerson, that what he's trying to do is charge the atmosphere, pressurize the atmosphere, if you will, for negotiations and diplomacy to work, particularly with China. This is really about trying to encourage, entice, incentivize China to do more to get to the negotiating table, with Pyongyang sort of out front. Now, I think it's a very debatable point whether or not he's actually having that effect, because the way it's read in some foreign capitals around the world, and probably being read in Pyongyang, is that Secretary Tillerson doesn't have the imprimatur of the president, and therefore may be undermined by him. So I think it's I do believe that they think that is the strategy. I do think that that was done deliberately. Whether it actually works and has the effect that they want in Beijing, I just don't know.
That's fascinating, John. So your contacts are telling you that this is a well-thought-out strategy. It's not just some random tweets that we're seeing.
That is correct. They say that this was something that the president did with malice aforethought in a good way, and that he was really trying to help Secretary Tillerson entice the Chinese to do more diplomatically. But again, you know, that it is deliberate, I think is their point, but that it will work, I think, is a great unknown right now.
And of course, we are seeing the president's continued attacks on a top Republican, Bob Corker. We saw him tweet again this morning, calling him little Bob Corker, demeaning him.
Yeah.
And we heard that sound, that interview with the New York Times. I think we've got a bit of that sound that I'd like to play from Bob Corker talking to the New York Times.
One of the reasons I supported Mattis and Tillerson and Kelly last week is, again, as long as there's people like that around him who are able to talk him down and, you know, when it gets spun up, you know, calm him down and continue to work with him before a decision is made, I think we'll be fine. I do worry that he's sometimes I feel like he's on a reality show of some kind, you know, when he's talking about these big foreign policy issues. And you know, he doesn't realize that, you know, that we could be heading towards World War III.
John, does he have a point at all? Could Trump actually say something that could trigger a dire reaction from an adversary?
Well, look, it's always possible that the President of the United States can do or say something that could trigger a violent reaction from an adversary around the world. You can't rule that out. But I do think that it's not helpful for us to be throwing around words like World War III. Now, look, I understand where Senator Corker's coming from, and he certainly knows what he's talking about when it comes to foreign policy as the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee on the Senate side. And certainly has a voice and should have a voice in the foreign policy direction of the United States. But I don't think it's helpful to try to ramp up the rhetoric and talk about World War III. Look, the other point that Senator Corker makes, and it's one that everybody should pay attention to, is that there are good, solid people surrounding President Trump. I agree with the senator that the president's tweeting and some of his bellicose rhetoric is unhelpful, if not reckless, and certainly irresponsible. But he has in place around him, with Secretary Mattis, with Ambassador Haley, with Secretary Tillerson, some measured, deliberate, thoughtful professionals that are trying to work their way through some of these very difficult questions and issues. North Korea is one of them, and I actually have given and continue to give the national security team under President Trump credit for the work that they've done to try to deal with this very, very looming challenge and very dangerous situation. It's not always helped and oftentimes undermined by the president. And that's why I think you've got to separate President Trump sometimes from the rest of his team. And I think that's the larger point that Senator Corker was trying to make, and I do associate myself with that. I just don't think the World War III comment, though, I don't think it's really helpful for us to be throwing that around.
Yeah, fair enough. John, just looking at the Iran nuclear deal, Germany and Britain are certainly trying to make it clear that the Iran deal is important.
Yes.
How do you see this playing out if Donald Trump decides to decertify the Iran deal later this week?
So look, here's a really important point on this. Even if he decertifies their compliance in his report to Congress this week, it doesn't end the deal. It doesn't trash it. It doesn't pull the United States out of it. What it does is it kicks it over to our Congress. They'll have 60 days to take a look at the president's decertification, and if they agree with it, then they could slap back nuclear-related sanctions. Now, if that happens, then we're in a different ballgame. Yeah, if they snap back the nuclear-related sanctions that the United States pulled when we agreed to the deal. If that happens, then we're in a new ballgame, and the deal very well could unravel, because what Tehran will do is say, well, look, if you're going to put these sanctions back on, that's in direct violation of the deal, which it would be. Therefore, we have no obligations to meet it, and then we're in a different situation. But if he does this week, it really doesn't change the deal fundamentally, and I have a hard time believing that our Congress, even our Republican-led Congress, would put these sanctions back in place.
All right, John Kirby, we will see how this all plays out. So great to get your perspective on all of that. Thanks so much.
My pleasure.